The wind moved like it was mourning something. It slid low along the dry riverbed and whispered through brittle grass, curling dust around the woman's hem. The ground here was cracked and pocked, the color of rusted iron. Sagebrush hunched like old men, wind-bowed and silent. In the distance, the mountains had lost their sharpness, softened by a haze that had not lifted in days. She stood alone near what had once been a fence line, holding a boy's hand in hers. He was small, maybe 6 or 7, too thin in the face. His eyes were dry, like he'd already learned not to cry because it did no good. Her own coat was too big on him. The sleeves rolled up nearly to his shoulders, the cuffs soiled with mud. The ranch was a smear of dark wood and broken shingles behind them. The main house slumped to one side like a man who had taken a bullet to the gut and was still trying to walk. Smoke drifted from the chimney in slow, uncertain threads. They had slept in the kitchen last night, both on the floor, near the stove that gave off more smell than heat. Mold and ash and some sour thing she could not name. Her boots were blistering her heels, but she didn't shift her weight. The boy gripped her hand like an anchor. Neither of them spoke. Crows had found the carcass by the fence. A mare, ribs like kindling poking from her side, the skin shriveled tight as hide on a drum. One bird pulled at an eye socket. She turned the boy's head gently away. Behind them, the sound of hooves came slow, deliberate. One horse. She could feel the thrum of it in her belly before she heard the breath of it in the cold air. She did not turn around right away. Let him speak first, if he had anything worth saying. The man's voice was quiet, not soft, but low like a river under ice. "Where is your father?" She turned then. The rider was tall, lean, his coat worn smooth at the shoulders, the brim of his hat pulled down low. His horse, a dun with a bad scar over the flank, shifted under him but did not spook. She met the man's gaze. Her own eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, and she knew what he saw when he looked at her. The boy looked up at her, and she felt the question pass from him into her. She swallowed. "Dead," she said. The man blinked once, then nodded. Not like he was surprised, just like he'd expected as much, and now it was confirmed. "Mother?" he asked. She hesitated, her hand tightening on the boy's. "My sister," she said. "I'm the aunt." The man dismounted. His boots hit the dust with a solid, certain sound. He led the horse by the reins a few paces closer, then stopped. He did not reach for the boy, did not offer comfort, and she was grateful for that. People made fools of themselves when they tried to be tender with what they didn't understand. He looked past her to the house. His eyes moved slow over the collapsed porch, the paintless boards, the smoke curling out like a question no one wanted to answer. "I'll be here now," he said. That was all. She didn't know what he meant, not exactly. Whether he meant he was staying, or that they were safe, or that he just didn't plan on riding away that day. But the words were like water dropped into dust, gone, absorbed, but leaving behind something softer. The boy let go of her hand. He stepped forward and looked at the man's horse, then back at him. The man didn't speak, just let the boy study him. That silence stretched wide enough to breathe in. Maybe, for the first time in weeks, a hawk circled once overhead, the only thing in the sky. The man looked to her, and this time there was a question in his eyes. Not one he spoke aloud. Something quieter. She nodded. Just once. Inside, the stove still burned low. The boy stepped over the threshold without being asked. She followed. The man stayed behind one more moment. Then he tied his horse to the half-standing post, ducked his head beneath the lintel, and followed them in. The kitchen was dim, its single window smudged with dirt and time. Light fell through it in pale lines, catching dust in the air like slow-moving snow. The stove ticked and sighed, as if it had bones that ached too. The boy sat cross-legged on a frayed rug near it, pulling off his boots with both hands. His toes were red and raw-looking in socks that didn't match. She moved to the counter, hands busy with nothing, just touching objects, as if reminding herself they were real. A cracked teacup, a bundle of dried beans, the empty basin where she'd washed his face that morning. The man stood by the door, hat in hand. He looked like he'd lived too long out in the open. His skin was burned dark, and the lines in his face ran deep. But there was no swagger in him, just stillness. That rare kind a man had when he'd seen something awful and chose to keep living anyway. "You got stock?" he asked. She shook her head. 2 hens. Nothing else left. Dolls. Some. Buried under what's left of the barn. He stepped forward, not to offer advice, not to pity her, but because he saw something needed fixing. His eyes swept the room like a man taking stock of winter wood. "I'm not staying in this house," he said. "It's not sound." She nodded. She hadn't slept a full night in it since the roof gave over the pantry. "There's the old line shack. Half a mile up. Needs a door." He grunted. Approval, maybe. Agreement. Then he looked at the boy. "What's his name?" "Matthew," she said. The man looked down at him. "You hungry, Matthew?" The boy nodded, not quick or eager, just honest. The man reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Dried meat and a heel of bread. He offered it to the boy with a hand so large it swallowed the bundle. The boy took it and unwrapped it slow, careful. Ate with his knees tucked up to his chest like he wasn't sure it would last. The man didn't sit. He stepped toward the window and looked out. "Storm coming," he said. She hadn't seen it. But when she followed his gaze, she could feel it. The pressure building behind the clouds like a fist waiting to close. The kind of cold that broke trees if it stayed too long. She turned to him. "Why are you here?" He took a while to answer. When he did, his voice was low. "Friend of your brother-in-law. Served with him once. Got a letter. Late, I guess." She held herself still. "He ever mentioned me?" The man shook his head. "No, just the boy. Said if anything ever happened, someone ought to come see." She looked away. Well, it happened. Silence filled the room like another person. She thought of the letter she'd burned, unread. Found it in the bottom of a drawer after burying her sister. No envelope. Just her name and a man's handwriting she didn't know. The fire took it quick. She hadn't had the strength then to read one more goodbye. Matthew had finished eating. He leaned against the stove with the trust of a child who didn't have anything else to lean on. The man turned to her again. "I'll go fix that shack. Storm'll hit by nightfall." She opened the cupboard, pulled down a lantern. "You'll need this," she said, offering it to him. Their hands brushed as he took it. Hers were chapped, cut across the knuckles. His were worse, scarred and calloused like old bark. She watched him go. Through the door, out into the cold, past the ruin of the barn. Matthew crawled into her lap without a word. He didn't speak often now. He used to before the fevers, before the coughing took his mother, before his father rode out and didn't come back. She rocked him slow, her cheek resting on his tangled hair. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow would follow, the first real storm of winter, but not the last. If you felt the weight of silence and still searched for hope, subscribe and share this path. By dusk, the wind had turned mean. It howled down from the mountains like something ancient and hungry, tearing through the cottonwoods, rattling the shutters like bones in a tin. Snow fell sideways, flung from the sky, and the old boards of the ranch groaned under its weight. She had lit every candle she could find and closed off all the rooms but the kitchen. Matthew was asleep on a pile of blankets near the stove, his breath fogging in the air each time he exhaled. She sat beside him, sewing what was left of a flannel shirt into something close to mittens. Her hands moved without thought. She did not pray. Had not in years, but she listened to the wind, to the stove, to the silence inside her. It was near full dark when the knock came. 3 slow raps on the back door. She rose, steadying herself with one hand on the wall, and unlatched the door. The man stepped inside, coated in snow, his hair wet, his jaw speckled with ice. He held the lantern, still lit, cupped like it was something sacred. The roof held, he said, shuttered the windows, doors on now. She stepped aside to let him pass. He shook off the cold like a mule shakes flies, then knelt by the stove to warm his hands. His fingers were stiff and red, and when he moved them, she saw pain tighten his mouth. "Let me see," she said. He didn't answer, just held out his hands, palms up. 3 fingers had split open from the cold, raw beneath the skin. She took a jar from the shelf and dipped 2 fingers into the grease inside. Tallow and yarrow. It smelled like smoke and earth. She rubbed it gently into his hands, watching his jaw twitch as he endured it. "You always do that?" he asked. "What?" 10 strangers without asking their names. She didn't smile. "If you were going to hurt us, you would have done it already." He looked at her, not with insult, not with surprise, just long enough to let her know he saw more than she gave. "Cole," he said finally. "Cole Travis." She nodded once. "Naomi." He stood, flexing his fingers now, slower but steadier. "That's a good name. It's what I've got," she said. They sat at the table. No food left to offer. Nothing between them but quiet. "You married?" he asked. "No." "Why not?" She met his gaze. "Because I was foolish once, and that was enough." He nodded, slow, like he understood the shape of that hurt. Outside, the wind tore at the corners of the house. Inside, something settled. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll dig out the barn. I saw a bit of lumber under the drift. You don't have to stay." "I know." She didn't ask why he would. She didn't want to know just yet. Some truths could wait. She looked toward the boy, his face buried in his coat. He needs a man around, someone who knows how to be still. Cole looked at Matthew, then back at her. He needs someone who'll stay. She said nothing, just watched the flame and the lantern sway with the wind. That night, she gave him the blankets her sister had sewn before the sickness, patched with old shirts and worn aprons. She set him a place on the floor near the door, and he didn't argue. Before she turned down the last wick, she paused in the doorway. "You said you served with his father?" He nodded once from the shadows. "Did you like him?" "No," Cole said. "But I respected him." "Why?" Cole looked into the dark. "Because when it got bad, he didn't run." She let that answer rest in her chest a while before blowing out the light. Snow crept under the cracks of the old house. The fire snapped. The wind howled. But the floor didn't feel so cold that night, and for the first time in weeks, she slept. The morning came gray and heavy, the world buried deep beneath a silence only snow can bring. Everything outside looked leveled and pure, as if the land had forgotten its scars for one day. Naomi woke to the soft scrape of the door opening. She sat up fast, heart already racing, but it was Cole. He moved quiet, wrapped in one of the patched blankets, boots in his hand. "You should sleep more," she said. He shook his head. "Best to move before the freeze sets deep." She rose and followed him to the door, pulling her shawl tight across her chest. The light outside was thick and dull, a sky with no sun. He stepped out into the knee-high snow, heading toward the barn without a word, the sound of his steps muffled into nothing. She watched him until he disappeared into the white. By mid-morning, she had boiled the last of the oats with a pinch of salt. Matthew woke slow and small, rubbing at his eyes like a kitten. He ate in silence, then helped her with the stove, feeding it kindling with hands too small for the work. But he tried. The day passed in chores. Naomi shoveled a narrow path to the chicken coop, her breath steaming in front of her, her muscles aching. The hens clucked pitifully, their water frozen to the tin. She cracked the ice with a ladle and scattered feed, whispering to them like they were old friends who might still leave her. By late afternoon, Cole returned, soaked and wind-chapped, dragging wood across his shoulders like he meant to rebuild the world. His arms were raw from the rope, but he said nothing, just nodded to the boy and started sawing. The sound rang sharp across the valley, a living sound. Naomi watched from the porch, arms crossed, heat blooming low in her stomach, not desire, not yet, but something else, a kind of safety she hadn't felt in years. That evening they sat again in the kitchen. She handed Cole a tin cup of tea, brewed from dried pine needles and old root. It tasted bitter, but it was hot. Matthew sat on the floor, shaping twigs with his pocket knife, carving notches like little stair steps. "You ever raise animals?" Cole asked. Naomi shook her head. "Grew corn, some squash. My sister handled the chickens." He nodded. "We'll start with goats, if we can get a buck from town. Might trade for it, if they still remember me. You know folks here?" He drank, winced, then nodded. "Used to trail cattle for the Monroe brothers, before they sold out and headed west." She let that sink in. "What stopped you from going west, too?" His eyes met hers. Tired eyes, full of road. "I kept waiting for the right reason to stop." Neither of them looked away this time. "You're not what I thought," she said. He smiled just barely. "No one ever is." They were quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that stretched without strain. Then Matthew spoke, his voice small but sure. "Can I help build the pen tomorrow?" Cole looked at him, serious. "You can hold the nails. That's a good job to start." Matthew nodded. and Naomi felt her throat close around the suddenness of hope. Later, after the boy had gone to sleep, Cole stood in the doorway again, watching the sky as snow began to fall once more, gentler this time. "I don't want to be trouble," he said. "You're not," she answered without turning. "I mean staying." She looked up then, and her voice was quiet but steady. "Then stay." Cole didn't smile, just nodded, slow, like a man taking an oath he wouldn't break. Outside, the snow began to cover yesterday's tracks. Inside, 3 breaths moved steady in the dark. The days found rhythm. Cole rose before the light. By the time Naomi stirred the stove's coals back to life, he was already outside, breaking the crusted snow with steady boots, dragging timber, setting posts, driving nails with a swing that never wavered. He worked with a calm that unnerved her at first, like he wasn't rushing toward anything or away from it, just doing the next right thing because it needed doing. Matthew followed him like a shadow, too small to lift much, but eager to learn. Cole showed him how to square the posts, how to read the sky for change, how to hold a tool so it didn't turn in your hand. He didn't praise the boy, didn't coddle, just nodded when something was done right, and that was enough. Naomi watched from the porch with raw hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She wanted to tell herself she still didn't trust him, that the quiet between them was only convenience. But truth has its own shape, and it grows whether you welcome it or not. One evening, she found him in the line shack, sharpening a blade by lantern light. The room smelled of wood shavings and smoke. It was warmer than the house now. He'd hung a heavy tarp over the door, patched the roof with care, laid down hay for insulation. There was a second cot now, made from pine and rope. "Thought I'd sleep here," he said, "in case the storms get worse." She nodded, stepping inside. "It's good work." He set the knife down, wiped the blade clean with cloth. "I asked around," he said. "A peddler came through 2 days back. I sent word. There's a man downriver, has a milk goat to trade." She studied him in the dim. His hair was damp with sweat, his eyes hollowed by work, but steady. "You doing all this for Matthew?" she asked. His gaze didn't waver. "No, I'm doing it for whoever stays." She folded her arms, the lantern casting long shadows up her sleeves. "I buried my sister in frozen dirt," she said, "by myself, and I lied to her boy to keep him from breaking." Cole didn't speak, just listened. She went on. "Every day I think about leaving, heading east, selling what's left, letting someone else take this land and make something from it." He leaned back, boots braced on the floor. "And why haven't you?" She closed her eyes. "Because something in me still wants to stay. And I don't know if that's hope or pride or just plain stubbornness." He nodded slowly, as if he understood too well. "I've left things behind," he said. "Some I meant to, some I didn't. I've never gone back for any of it. But this place, it feels like something that could hold." She turned her head, looked out through the frost-rimmed window. The moon cast the snow in silver. "And if I ask you to stay," she said, "I already am." His voice was soft, but solid. She stepped forward then, and he stood. Not close, not yet, but close enough for the heat between them to be something real. She reached out, almost without thinking, and touched his sleeve. It was damp with the day's labor, the fabric rough against her fingers. "I don't want saving," she said. "I know. I won't be easy. I don't expect you to be." And then, quiet as breath, she said, "Just don't leave without saying goodbye." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then met her eyes. "I've said my last goodbye," he said. "From here on, it's only staying or asking to be taken with." She stood there a moment longer, then turned and left the shack. Snow had begun to fall again, light and slow. Her footprints led home, but now there were his beside hers. Spring came slow, like a child waking from a long fever. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and bone-white roots twisted in the dirt. The earth was soft again, and the wind no longer bit it, only murmured now, as if it too was tired of fighting. Buds showed timidly along the fence line, and the creek that had slept all winter began to murmur through the stones. Naomi woke one morning to birdsong and the smell of smoke from the shack, where Cole had already risen to boil water. She watched from the window as he crouched near the fire, Sleeves rolled to his elbows, the boy beside him, mimicking every move. The sight tightened her chest. Later that day, they began planting. Naomi knelt in the thawed soil, sleeves rolled, apron filthy. She worked in silence, her hands sinking into the cold earth. Each seed pressed into the dirt felt like a vow, small, fragile, but certain. Matthew helped, more careful than fast, asking which plants needed shade, which could bear the wind. She told him what she remembered. Cole listened, then added what he'd learned on the trail, in other fields, under harsher suns. It was the first time they worked as three, not as survivors, but as a family. That evening, as the sky dimmed to gold, Naomi brought out the last jar of blackberry preserves. She spread it thin on bread and handed it to Cole without a word. He took it with quiet gratitude, nodding once. He'd earned it. Matthew fell asleep before the fire, curled with the hound that had wandered in weeks ago and never left. Cole stayed by the door. She joined him there. "They'll come eventually," she said. He looked over at her. "The boy's kin," she clarified. "Some cousin or courtman with papers. They'll come asking who we are to keep him." "I'll be here," he said. She glanced at him. "You think that's enough?" He was quiet a long while. Then he spoke low. "I once ran cattle through Arizona. There was a boy there lost both parents to fever. He lived with a man not his blood, but the man raised him all the same. When the courts came, the town spoke. Said blood wasn't the only thing that made a family. You think they'd speak for us?" He looked at her, steady and calm. "If they see what's true, they will." She felt the cold edge of doubt in her gut, but something stronger rose beside it now. Something rooted. "I've lived most my life waiting for the next bad thing," she said. "I don't know how to trust the good." "You don't have to trust it," he said. "Just stand still long enough to let it catch up." She looked at his face, lit orange by firelight, lined with the weight of years. Not beautiful, but honest. "Do you ever want children?" she asked, the question catching her by surprise even as it left her mouth. He didn't flinch. "I want to give someone what I never had," he said. "A name that means something, a home that holds." Her throat tightened. She reached out, fingers curling into his coat. "I can't promise forever," she said. "You don't have to," he answered. And then, quiet, he added, "But I'll stay for as long as you'll let me." The wind sighed through the cracks of the old house. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he didn't move. Outside, the ground was waking. Inside, so was she. Trouble came with the thaw. It rode in on a wagon with a team too clean for the road, wheels greased, leather polished. The man sitting atop it wore a city coat, stiff and black, and his boots had never met honest mud. Another rode beside him, silent, square-jawed, eyes sharp under a bowler hat. Naomi was hauling water from the creek when she saw them come down the ridge road. Her heart sank, not fast, not loud, but slow and deep, like a rock dropped in a well. She wiped her hands on her apron and watched them descend. Cole stepped out from the barn, his hammer still in his hand. He didn't speak, just stood by the gate, his body quiet, ready. Matthew was up at the chicken coop, chasing the red hen. Naomi whistled low. He stopped, looked to her. She gave a slight shake of her head, and he disappeared behind the fence. The wagon stopped just past the porch. The man in the coat tipped his hat with a kind of mechanical politeness. "Good day, ma'am. I'm Elias Crane, Child Services. This here's Deputy Home." Naomi's mouth went dry. "We received word," Crane said, climbing down carefully, "of an orphaned minor, Matthew Sims. We're here to assess his situation, possibly retrieve him." "On whose authority?" Cole asked from behind her. Crane looked over. "The state's." Naomi stepped forward, chin high. "He's safe here." "Safe," Crane echoed, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Ma'am, your name does not appear on any custody documentation. In fact, you failed to file any notice with the court after the death of his parents. That's considered abandonment, legally speaking." "I didn't abandon him," she snapped. "I buried his mother with my own hands." Cole moved to her side, slow but solid. "He's fed," he said. "He's sheltered. He's got a place here." Deputy Home dismounted. His eyes swept the yard, the shed, the fence line. He wasn't listening to the words. He was reading the place. Crane kept his eyes on Naomi. Intentions don't equal rights. We'll take him to the county until a hearing can be arranged. Naomi's hands shook. She clenched them into fists. You think some room full of orphans and strangers is better than here? She asked. I think the law exists to protect him, Crane said, and until it's satisfied, he comes with us. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her body felt hollowed out, like the wind had gotten inside her ribs and scraped everything bare. Cole took a breath, deep and quiet. You've made your assessment, he said. Let's talk inside. Crane hesitated. Holm glanced at the boy's tracks in the dust. Naomi stepped aside. Come in. Inside, they sat stiff at the table. Crane unfolded papers, talked of guardianship, of signatures, of proceedings that had already begun in town. Naomi tried to listen, but the sound was water behind glass, too far to catch. Then Cole spoke. I served with Matthew's father. We were scouts in the 11th Cavalry. He named me in a letter before he passed. Left it with a clerk in Santa Fe. Letters got the boy's name and mine. Said if anything happened, I was to come for him. Crane blinked. You have this letter? Not yet, Cole said, but I've written for it. The man still works the post. He'll send it. That's not binding. No, Cole agreed. But it's something. Naomi looked at Cole. He hadn't told her about the letter. She saw in his eyes that maybe he hadn't known it mattered until now. Crane folded his hands. I can give you 3 days, no more. If documentation doesn't arrive, we'll return, with or without consent. They left as they came, precise, distant. When the dust settled, Naomi slumped against the doorframe, knees weak. I can't lose him, she whispered. Cole stepped beside her, quiet. You won't. She looked at him, anger and fear crashing inside her. You don't know that. I don't, he said, but I know this. He belongs here, and I will fight for that. She stared at him, the truth of it too big to speak. He touched her hand, just once. We're not alone in this. Outside, Matthew reappeared, walking slow, head down. She opened her arms without a word, and he ran into them. And this time, when she held him, it wasn't just grief that filled her, it was fire. The waiting felt like standing in a stream with no bottom, just current and cold, and the ache of not knowing. Cole spent the next 3 days riding. To the station, to the old Monroe place, to anyone who might vouch for him, for Naomi, for the boy. He came back dusted in mud, lips cracked, horse-lathered and tired. Each night he brought back something, a name, a signature, a promise, but not the letter. Naomi stayed home, keeping Matthew close. She cooked meals too large for 3, just to feel the warmth of the stove and the weight of work in her hands. The boy seemed quiet but whole, as if something in him trusted that the walls wouldn't fall this time. He clung to Cole more openly now, asked questions, mimicked his walk, sat beside him as he repaired the gate, and didn't flinch when the hammer missed and blood bloomed on Cole's knuckle. But Naomi felt the clock, heard it in the slow creak of the house, in the ticking of the stovetop kettle, in the way Matthew's laughter came and went like sunlight between clouds. The second night, after the boy had gone to sleep, she found Cole by the edge of the field, looking out toward the hills. They'll come tomorrow, she said. I know. She stood beside him in the tall grass, wind brushing her hair across her cheek. I don't know how to stand in front of men like that, she admitted. Not when the law's behind them. Not when all I've got is what I feel. He looked at her, something fierce in his eyes. Then you stand behind me. She searched his face. And what if they say no? What if they take him? Cole didn't speak at first. Then we find a way back to him. The moon came up like a bruised coin behind the trees. She felt something break in her softly, silently, and in its place, something else rose. Not hope, but steel. The next morning, they dressed Matthew in his best shirt and combed his hair flat. Naomi baked bread before sunrise, the scent curling into every corner of the house. She needed it to feel full, just in case. At midday, the wagon came back, this time with one more man. A judge, by the look of him gray-bearded, narrow-eyed, papers in his lap. Crane stepped out first. Miss Avery, he said. She nodded. Cole stood by the porch, hands at his sides. This is Judge Hollis. He's come to settle the matter. If there's proof, we'll see it. If not, I've got it. They turned. Cole reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet, edges smudged, corners worn. Letter from James Sims, filed with the quartermaster in Santa Fe, certified. He named me guardian if anything happened to him and Sarah. Crane opened the letter, passed it to the judge. Hollis read it slow, his lips barely moving. The silence stretched. Naomi couldn't breathe. When the judge finished, he looked down at Matthew, who stood behind her, holding tight to her skirt. "Boy," the judge said gently, "do you want to stay here?" Matthew nodded once, eyes wide, mouth closed. "And you, Miss Avery? You willing to take full care? Feed, school, clothe, house him?" "Yes, sir. Even if this man," he nodded to Cole, "goes?" She flinched, looked at Cole. "Yes," she said, "but I hope he doesn't." The judge's face softened just a touch. He looked down at the letter again. "Well," he said, folding it, "looks like the boy already has a home." Crane opened his mouth, closed it. The deputy just touched the brim of his hat once and turned back to the wagon. Naomi felt her knees weaken. Cole caught her arm before she fell. They were gone 5 minutes later, the sound of hooves fading like a fever dream. Inside, Naomi knelt and pulled Matthew to her chest. He didn't cry, neither did she. They didn't have to. Outside, Cole leaned against the porch rail, his hands shaking now that no one was watching. When she stepped outside, he didn't turn. "You stayed," she said. He nodded. "You fought. I said I would." She came to stand beside him, took his hand. "I want you here," she said. He looked at her. "You sure?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I don't want to run anymore." He squeezed her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. "Then we build," he said. "We start with this." And behind them, inside, Matthew laid 3 stones on the hearth, one for his mother, one for his father, and one small and smooth for whatever came next. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. There was work to do, endless work. The fence line had collapsed under the weight of the winter's last storm, and Cole spent 3 mornings digging out the posts and resetting them with Matthew holding steady at his side. Naomi patched the roof in the hen house, climbed up with a hammer and a strip of old canvas, and came down blistered, smiling through her sweat. They planted more. Radishes. Beans. Tomatoes in cut tin cans kept warm by the windows until the soil was ready. At night, they took turns reading by lamplight, mostly from a water-stained Bible and an almanac that had somehow survived 6 years and 2 floods. Matthew was laughing again. Not often, but fully, like the sound belonged to him again. Naomi kept waiting for something to shatter, for fate to knock again. But it didn't. Or maybe it already had. And this was what was left after the storm. One evening after supper, Cole came in late. Dirt on his shirt, nails in his pocket, the smell of fresh timber still clinging to him. Naomi was bent over the stove, wiping it down. "I built something," he said. She turned. "What kind of something?" He held out his hand. In it, a small wooden carving, a ring rough but smooth enough to wear. The grain curled like a river bend. Her breath caught. "It's not proper," he said. "Not yet, but I've been carving at it since March. I wanted to ask you sooner, but we had other things to carry." She took the ring, turned it in her fingers. Her heart felt thick in her chest. "I don't need a wedding," she said. "Not if it changes what this already is." "It won't," he said. "But I want to stand with you." Out loud, in front of God if he's still listening. She looked up at him, firelight dancing in his eyes. "Yes," she said. "Not because I need to, because I choose to." He smiled, and she felt her ribs loosen, like she could breathe deeper for the first time in years. They married at the base of the cottonwoods, with the creek running beside them and Matthew between them. Cole had trimmed his beard. Naomi had sewn a new hem into her dress. The judge came back to sign the papers himself, said it felt right to finish what he'd started. There were no crowds, no music, just the wind, the birds, and the promise that was already there. Matthew gave them each a rock he'd painted blue, for the sky, he said, so they'd always remember what it meant to look up and see there was more. By summer, the goats came. Then a mare, traded from a neighbor who'd seen Cole's fence work and offered 3 hens besides. Naomi taught herself to can. Cole started building a second room onto the house. Matthew had grown an inch, maybe 2. His voice cracked sometimes when he yelled across the yard. One morning, Naomi sat on the porch steps, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. The nausea had come and gone, but the knowing remained. Cole stepped out beside her, holding 2 mugs. She looked up at him, her smile easy, full. "I think we're going to need another chair." He paused, looked at her, then to her hand. Realization passed over his face, slow and tender, like sunlight creeping over a hill. He sat beside her, reached for her hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Out in the field, Matthew chased the hound, laughter carrying clear through the wide open air. The grass swayed, the sky held, and the house stood steady. Subscribe and follow where loss becomes strength, and strength becomes love.